Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about Kiev. Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, and Sirsky, the commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine, made lots of very interesting statements. Zelensky said that Russia has begun to strike at rear energy facilities in Ukraine. The Russians are now concentrating strikes against our energy sector. Today, a strike was launched at the Zaporizhzhia power plant near Kiev. So Zelensky is trying to tell us that the next 4-5 months are going to be very difficult for Ukraine. We know that the Russians currently are tasked to take under complete control the rest of Donetsk region, and the Russians will use all means they have for these purposes. The Russians most likely during the next several months will attack bridges, energy facilities, just with one purpose: to force Ukrainians to fall back from this region and to accept Russia's demands. The commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine emphasized that the Russian army has a 3-6 times advantage in forces and resources over the Ukraine army. Currently, the enemy, the Russians, he means, has a threefold advantage in forces and resources, and in the main areas of concentration of its efforts, it can prevail by 4 to 6 times. So you know that Sirsky sounds like a person who is trying to do everything he can with the purpose to stabilize the situation, but due to many factors, most likely he will not be able to succeed. Most likely he will be defeated. So it seems that he's trying to probably excuse to explain what is going to happen during the next days. He's trying to make everything he can, but sometimes it's impossible, at least due to the huge gap between the number of Russian forces and Ukrainian forces on the ground. Now let's talk about the situation on the ground, and first let's talk about the Zaporizhzhia direction. The Western analytics reported that Russian redeployments continue. Damaged 11th Air Assault Brigade has moved from Sumy to Kherson to free up the 104th Air Assault Division for further offensive operation in southern Zaporizhzhia Oblast. The 104th Air Assault Division, formed in 2023, is currently fully recovered since it was in Kherson front. So the Western analytics are saying that during the previous days they managed to record additional redeployment of the armed forces of the Russian Federation from the Sumy region in the direction of the Kherson region. And you know that this is very interesting redeployment, because this means that the Russians most likely are going to stop any offensive operations in Sumy region, in Bryansk region. The Russians will stop these lines, and they're going to move damaged units in the direction of Kherson with the purpose to stabilize, not just to stabilize, but to probably to control the situation and to hold everything as is. So currently the front line in this area is stable, so the Russians are planning to move forces in this area just with the purpose to probably to have the same picture like we have right now. But at the same time, the Russians are saying that fully recovered forces are being moved from the Kherson region in the direction of the city of Orekhov, where most likely Ukrainians are expecting another wave of offensive operation from the Russian side, which is going to happen in coming days. Furthermore, when talking about this area, during the previous 24 hours, additional changes on the ground were recorded in the western Zaporizhzhia direction. Ukrainian resources published this video where we can see how Ukrainian FPV drones were attacking buildings and constructions with Russian soldiers. For example, this episode was geolocated, and this is exactly the building that was attacked by Ukrainian drone, which means that this territory is under complete Russian control. So this is the situation, for example, by the end of the 8th of September of 2025, and this is the situation by the beginning of the 9th of September. So the Russians most likely managed to take under complete control the village by the name of Plavny, and most likely today the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation will confirm this information. If not today, then obviously in coming days. And then the Russians will be able to continue offensive operations on the city of Stepnogorsk. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Zaporizhzhia direction. During the previous 24 hours, several pro-Russian resources reported about additional changes on the ground. The Russians are saying that currently there are very heavy clashes on the territory of the village by the name of Sosnovka. The Russians are attacking this territory, and the Russians emphasizing that most likely the village would be abandoned by the Ukrainians in coming days or even hours. Furthermore, the Russians answered the village of Ternovo from the east, and currently there are also very heavy clashes, and the Russians are saying that most likely this defense line of the armored forces of Ukraine would be abandoned by the Ukrainians completely. We're talking about the territory between the villages of Novonikolaevka, Berezova, Ternovo and Sosnovka, and if Ukrainians lose this defense layer, the Russians will be able to get a bit closer to the cities of Pokrovsk and Gulyai-Polye and to the road R85. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Pokrovsk direction. We continue receiving very interesting videos and geolocations to the east of the city of Mirnograd. So let's discuss these videos in details. I would like to remind you that several days ago we got very interesting video how Russians were trying to attack the eastern part of Mirnograd, and based on that video we adjusted the map by adding these three lines and these three lines in the complete Russian control, including these facilities. If you remember, there was a video how Russian infantry fighting vehicle was moving along these three lines and the very heavy fire of Ukrainian drones. At the end, the Russian vehicle was destroyed somewhere at this point. But based on this video, we adjusted the map and we were waiting, and we start waiting for additional updates. And since the beginning of September, from this area, we received lots of updates. For example, from the area of this facility, we got a few videos of how Ukrainians were destroying Russian vehicles, Russian tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, but during these videos and during these episodes, we can't see even a single moment how Ukrainians were attacking Russian soldiers, which means that indeed the Russians have possibilities to get here, but the Russians have no possibilities to evacuate vehicles and tanks from this direction. So we have enough of proofs to confirm that most likely there are Russian soldiers on the territory of these facilities, and the Russians control the most important logistic roads that Ukrainians use to supply and support their contingent on the territory of the city of Novoekonomichne and the village of Nikolaevka. So this is the situation that took place before. Now today, this morning, we got another video from the southeastern part of the city of Mirnograd, and here we can see the same episode. Not the same episode. Here we can see another infantry fighting vehicle of the armored forces of the Russian Federation that was attacked by Ukrainians. So based on these two videos, based on the previous videos and this fresh video, we adjusted the map, and now we see that the Russians, according to all these geolocations, have a very strong and very interesting foothold to the east and the southeast of the city of Mirnograd. The Russians managed to concentrate additional forces and additional units, and this is a very huge pocket of resistance that Ukrainians still haven't managed to eliminate. As of now, I can't tell you for sure how exactly the Russians answer this territory, how the Russians supply and support their contingent on the territory of this pocket. As for several pro-Russian resources, according to them, the Russians haven't lost any position on the territory of the settlement of Novoekonomichne, and according to several pro-Russian resources, everything, let's say, to the east and to the north of this red line is in the complete Russian control. So we see that there are some differences between pro-Ukrainian resources and pro-Russian resources regarding this territory, but if you ask my opinion, I believe that there is something like a cake. Some positions under complete Russian control, some positions under complete Ukrainian control, and currently there are very heavy clashes for this territory, for these fields, and for this dense network of fortifications. The Russians control these positions, the Ukrainians control these strongholds and this part of the city of Novoekonomichne. So let's wait what is going to be next, but obviously this is one of the most important and decisive front line in the entire maybe special military operation. A lot of things depends on this defense layer. If Ukrainians lose this defense layer and if Ukrainians are forced to fall back in the area of the city of Mirnograd, then the Russians will be able to begin the next stage of the Pokrovsk agglomeration assault operation. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Siversk-Lyman directions. Before we moving in this area, first let's talk about the city of Donetsk. Very important updates we got today. Once again, since the beginning of September, we received lots of updates regarding additional regrouping and additional changes on the ground. So the Russians began several weeks ago strategical regrouping. They're bringing more and more forces in this area. When talking about Sumy direction, we are talking about 155th, 40th Marine Brigades. When talking about the Kherson direction, the Russians are redeploying 104th Air Assault Division. So the Russians are bringing more and more forces. And it seems that the Russians are about or were about to finish their strategical redeployment. And of course, we need to understand that the city of Donetsk is probably the only safe place or secured area that can be used by the Russians as headquarters or something like this. So the Russians redeployed, established headquarters, command centers, communication centers, and so on. And the Russians are about to begin their offensive or are about to intensify their offensive operation. So that is why during the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians launched a massive missile and drone strike all over the entire city of Donetsk. Lots of explosions and lots of attacks were recorded. And the most important, Ukrainians attacked the city of Donetsk not just with drones. Ukrainians probably for the first time for a very long period of time attacked the city of Donetsk with cruise missiles of Western production. The sources are saying that Storm Shadow missiles were recorded, maybe Scalp missiles were recorded. So it was a very powerful attack from the Ukrainian side, and the main purpose of this attack was to destroy and to damage command centers, headquarters, commanders, officers, and generals of the armed forces of the Russian Federation who are currently involved in this possible major offensive operation with the purpose to establish complete control over the Donetsk region. Lots of losses, lots of casualties were recorded, mainly among civilians. At least the Russians are talking just about civilians. So lots of videos were published during the war. So this is the moment of how Ukraine cruise missile attack position of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. So this is very important. So if Ukrainians attacked Russians today, this means that most likely by the morning of the 9th of September, the Russians finished their strategical regrouping, and now the main headquarters and command centers are already here. So which means that the next days are going to be very, very hot. And now let's move further and let's talk about the Lyman and Siversk directions. During the previous 24 hours, additional changes were recorded on the territory of the settlement of Zaporizhzhia. The pro-Russian resources published this video where we can see how Russians were fighting for the settlement of Zaporizhzhia and how Russians in the final part of this video established another flag. This time the flag was placed in the most western part of the settlement in this point. Based on this video we adjusted the map. So this is, for example, the situation by the end of the 7th of September. This is the beginning of the situation before the major offensive started. So this is the situation by the end of the 8th of September, and this is the situation by the end of the 9th of September. If you remember, yesterday we got another video where we could see 3 flags placed on the territory of Zaporizhzhia, today another flag. So based on this video and based on these changes, we can say that most likely the Russians now are moving from the south in the northern direction. First, the Russians were tasked to block the 0528 road in the southwestern part of the settlement. Ukrainians are no longer available to counterattack or to supply their contingent in the northern part, and now the Russians began moving in the northern direction. Several sources reported that by the morning of the 9th of September, the Russians secured up to 60% of the settlement. We believe that in coming days, maybe during this week, the Ukrainians will lose control over the settlement completely, and the Russians will announce this. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Kupyansk direction. According to information we have, according to pro-Russian resources, during the previous 24-48 hours, the Russians managed to improve their positions significantly. So this is the map by the end of the 8th of September of 2025, and this is the situation by the beginning of the 9th of September. As you can see, the armored force of the Russian Federation took almost completely the central part and the northern part of the city of Kupyansk. Now we can say that indeed the Russians control around 50% of the settlement. Furthermore, according to information we have, currently the main clashes are taking place for the railway station Kupyansk, the southern. So in this area, and it seems that the Russians are trying to cut this pocket that goes along the railways, and as soon as the Russians are able to cut this pocket, the Ukrainians would be forced to fall back in the central and in the southern parts of the city of Kupyansk. If Ukrainians lose the northern part of the city of Kupyansk completely, this is going to be the beginning of complete collapse of the territory of the Kupyansk defense, and most likely we can start counting days before the entire city and this Kupyansk pocket will fall in Russia's hands. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.